For half a century, troops in close combat with the enemy have watched and rejoiced when they heard that unmistakable brrrt noise in the sky. That sound can only mean one thing: an A-10 Thunderbolt II firing its 30mm Gatling cannon and turning the enemy into Swiss cheese. But that beloved brrrt might go silent soon. The United States Air Force is dead set on making it that way. It insisted for years that the A-10 Warthog must go. Congress said no for a long time. Now the Air Force might finally be able to fulfill its wishes. But why has the Air Force wanted the beloved Hog gone? And why has Congress and even the Army resisted it so much? Buckle up as we take a flying tour of the A-10 and the long, complicated fight to send it to the boneyard. In fiscal year 2023, the Air Force cheered as the annual National Defense Authorization Act finally gave it a breakthrough. The law permitted 21 A-10 aircraft to be sent to the boneyard. The 122nd Fighter Wing at Fort Wayne Air National Guard Base in Indiana was the chosen dispensary unit. The move brought the USAF's fleet of A-10s down from 281 to 260, and the snowball got rolling downhill. In fiscal year 2024, the A-10s at Davis Monthan Air Base in Arizona and Moody Air Force Base in Georgia were put to the block. The retirement brought the total fleet down from 260 to 218. 36 of the Davis Monthan A-10s were sent to the boneyard. The remaining 6 came from Moody Air Force Base. But wait, there's more. The FY 2024 NDAA gave the Air Force permission to retire the remaining 40 of the Davis Monthan A-10s in short order. Now that it's finally getting permission, the Air Force is retiring every A-10 it can at a rapid rate, as if it's afraid that permission will be revoked. There's good reason for that fear. The A-10 still has a lot of cheerleaders in Washington. Why is there such a big fight over the A-10? To find the answer to that question, we need to go back in time. Age is a big reason why the Air Force wants the Warthog gone. The aircraft made its debut in the early 1970s. It was a very different world. The United States and its NATO allies feared a war in Europe that would see wave after wave of Soviet tank columns grind down their outnumbered forces on a narrow front. So the Pentagon wanted to create an aircraft that would be good at destroying the Soviet Union's ground forces, especially its tanks. The aircraft needed to be lethal and durable since it was going to take a lot of fire. The resulting A-10, manufactured by Fairchild Republic, fulfilled all of those requirements really, really well. The war in Europe, fortunately, never came, but it performed so well in the Gulf War that the Pentagon abandoned plans to develop a close air support version of the F-16. Maybe the best example of its prowess came in April 2003 during Operation Iraqi Freedom. On the 7th, an A-10 pilot by the name of Kim Campbell diverted her aircraft from its original flight path to provide close air support to troops in a vulnerable position near the North Baghdad Bridge. She used her 2.75-inch high-explosive rockets to neutralize the threat and allow friendly forces to take the position, but in the process, her plane's tail was hit by a surface-to-air missile. The aircraft took wounds on wounds after that. One engine was badly damaged, the redundant hydraulic system took hard hits too, which disabled the flight controls, horizontal stabilizer, brakes, and landing gear. Despite this, she was still able to fly her A-10 using the manual controls back to base over 100 miles away. After landing, she emerged from her aircraft without so much as a scratch. A ground inspection revealed hundreds of holes in the aircraft. Campbell was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that day and retired in 2021 at the rank of colonel. Okay, so we can understandably see why ground troops and pilots love the Hog. It does its job better than any aircraft ever conceived or rolled out. It's undoubtedly the most survivable aircraft ever built. But the Air Force argues that the world of Soviet tank columns is no more, and that today's threat environment is unrecognizable, even compared to Operation Iraqi Freedom and the War on Terror. Today, the United States faces threats from peer or near-peer competitors with much more advanced radar, missiles, and aircraft. Against these, the A-10 stands out like a sore thumb. It has no stealth qualities, making it vulnerable to modern, longer-range surface-to-air or air-to-air missiles. The A-10 has other drawbacks. It has a slow speed of 420 miles per hour and a low range of 800 miles. These specs were adequate when the mission was to fly close air support across the confined battlefields of Europe. They're less than adequate when it comes to crossing distances in the much more spacious Indo-Pacific region. And the situation in the Indo-Pacific is what's keeping the Air Force up at night now. China's military buildup there has greatly upset the balance of power and eroded America's traditional conventional advantage. China has built missiles, radar systems, planes, ships, and submarines at a fantastic pace. China is building so many weapons so quickly that the Pentagon and US intelligence community fear that an invasion of Taiwan will come as soon as 2027. China's authoritarian, revanchist leader Xi Jinping has ordered his military to be ready to take the island by force by that year if he decides he wants to do it. The Air Force argues that to defeat this threat, the United States military will need to invest in systems that can operate in and steadily reduce the anti-access area denial zone that China has created. Such a mission calls for versatile platforms that can perform more than one task well, while avoiding detection. For example, think about the F-35 Lightning II. This fighter jet was stuck in developmental hell for years and became a laughingstock, and it's true that the F-35 won't score 5 stars on any scale. Can it match the A-10 in a pure close air support role? Not even close. Can it perform the task well enough? Controversially, the Air Force says that it can, and do a lot of other things well enough too. And these days, good enough is the Air Force's default way of doing things. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and all that. Think about a hypothetical example to get a better look at what that means. Suppose it's 2030 and Xi Jinping has finally decided to make his move on Taiwan. This isn't an operation he'd be able to conceal. D-Day deceptions are impossible in the age of satellite surveillance. Even so, the Air Force thinks the A-10 would have several problems responding to this sort of threat. On the surface, it would be an ideal platform to wreak havoc among the Chinese landing craft and any troops that made it ashore. The problem is getting there. It would have to traverse the distance from bases in Japan or the Philippines. This area is the most dangerous part of China's A2AD zone. China has thousands of missiles that can reach ranges within 1,000 kilometers of its homeland, and that's not even the entire threat. Its many ships and aircraft are packing shorter-range surface-to-air and air-to-air missiles too, and they will be on patrol. There isn't a good chance that an A-10 squadron will be able to make it through this screen of missiles and get to the contested space. The A-10 might be an amazingly survivable aircraft, but it's not going to make it through an impact from something like the PL-15 air-to-air missile fired from a J-20 fighter it would have a hard time detecting. The A-10 will be spotted and shot at before it could see a target, and with its slow speed, be unlikely to evade the incoming missile. The Air Force argues that using the A-10 in circumstances like this would be sending the pilot on a suicide mission. Now contrast it with the F-35 or F-22. These aircraft, the F-22 in particular, are fast. They're also stealthy. They can traverse the A2AD zone without being detected. In a fight over Taiwan, the F-22 would focus on neutralizing Chinese supporting aircraft. That's what it was designed to do. Meanwhile, the F-35 would take a general-purpose role. It can assist other aircraft as a much more mobile and less detectable AWACS platform, shoot at enemy aircraft from long range, or launch ordnance or air-to-surface missiles at important targets to support friendly forces on the ground. The Raptors and Lightning IIs in this fight would be able to do all of this, and most of the aircraft would make it out alive, ready to go again. Meanwhile, the job of close air support can increasingly be carried out by another platform: drones. Just look at Ukraine and see how many Russian tanks have gotten their roofs blown skyward and you'll find your proof. Drones have even played an important role in the sinking of large Russian ships like the cruiser Moskva in April 2022. And all of this can be done for a much cheaper price than even the A-10, all for much lower risk. For all of these reasons, the Air Force says it's hard to argue that the A-10 has a place over the modern battlefield. By the mid-2010s, as China began to militarize islands in the South China Sea, this new mission for the Air Force became clear. Fortunately for it, the F-35 began to enter service at around the same time. Discussion had been going on for years, but that was when the Air Force began to make detailed plans for retiring the A-10 fleet. The Air Force made its first serious effort to phase out the A-10 in 2014. That year, it toyed with the idea of cutting the A-10's wing modernization program and save $500 million, but found that the program was too far along. A more serious effort came to stop the latest round of software updates, called Suite 8. Suite 8 included a new transponder system to permit other units to identify individual A-10s as friendly aircraft. Congressional resistance came immediately. Then Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire accused the Air Force of attempting to retire the A-10 through the back door, in violation of that year's NDAA. Ayotte had a personal connection to the A-10. Her husband was an Air Force veteran that flew the plane, but she was far from the only member of Congress who fought to save the A-10. An entire caucus formed to resist the Air Force, and it proved successful. The Warthog remained in the skies. It would be the first of 5 more times between fiscal years 2014 and 23. As the Air Force continued to weigh its options with the A-10, another interested player came into the debate. The US Army was much more affectionate toward the ugly old hog in the 2010s than the service that operated it. Its troops remembered what the A-10 did for them in Desert Storm and the War on Terror. In February 2015, the Air Force again proposed retiring the entire A-10 fleet over a 5-year period. The Army, meanwhile, continued to praise the Warthog. This raised speculation that the Army was planning to take the A-10 off the Air Force's hands. The US Army does not operate fixed-wing attack aircraft, but there's no law that says it can't. Instead, the Army and Air Force came to an agreement, the Key West Agreement, in 1948 over the matter. This pact led to the Army deciding not to duplicate the Air Force's functions. Now some of you are wondering, since the Air Force planned to no longer fly the A-10, could it count as a duplicate function if the Army flew it instead? The Army officially addressed the speculation when its then Secretary John McHugh said there was no chance that the service would operate its own A-10s. Still, the speculation showed how deep the resistance to the Warthog's retirement had become in Washington. 2016 brought even more resistance to the Air Force's ideas. The A-10's usefulness in operations against ISIS proved its continued prowess. Meanwhile, its deployment to Europe, as Russia increased its aggressiveness in Ukraine, reminded people that it was still an ideal weapon for destroying enemy armored columns, the type that Russia had a lot of. The Air Force appeared to wave the white flag in 2017 and said it would continue to fly the Warthog indefinitely, but appearances can be deceiving. It called for Congress to fully fund the A-10 fleet for fiscal year 2018, but it proposed decreasing the number of squadrons to 6. By now, the F-35 was beginning to enter service, and the Air Force continued the push as more of them came online. Now there was finally an aircraft on hand, at the ready, to replace the A-10. With hundreds of F-35s now in service, Congress finally gave in for the fiscal year 2023 and 24 budgets. The Air Force plans to retire all of the remaining A-10s before the end of the decade. In March 2023, then Air Force Chief of Staff and current Joint Chiefs Chairman Charles Brown said that he expected the service to send all the remaining A-10s to the boneyard by 2028 or 2029. The A-10 is a great airplane. It's a great airplane in an uncontested environment. The challenge is we're going to be in more contested environments in the future. That statement sums up the Air Force's plans as it moves into the middle of the century. By the 2040s, it plans to operate only 4 combat aircraft: the NGAD, the F-35A, the F-15EX, and the F-16V, with even the awesome F-22 Raptor on the chopping block. How could the ugly old A-10 survive? Well, maybe it can, because the story for the A-10 might not be over just yet. As the Air Force moves them to the boneyard, some policymakers in Washington wonder whether they will be better served by moving elsewhere, like Ukraine elsewhere. It seemed an ideal weapon for an ideal environment, just like it had when Putin made his initial moves in Ukraine. The A-10 was designed to operate against Russian forces in Europe after all, and President Zelensky requested aircraft from the West as soon as the invasion began. The A-10 is a rugged plane. It can operate in less than luxurious facilities, can take off from short runways, and requires minimal training time for the pilots. The Ukrainians in fact discussed the A-10. In December 2022, then Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov admitted that he had asked his American counterpart Lloyd Austin for 100 A-10s that the Air Force had wanted to get rid of for so long. Austin responded by saying that the delivery was impossible and made no sense, because they would be squeaky targets for Russia's air defense systems. Reznikov said he threw his hands up in a mock surrender as he agreed. One wonders if he was entirely sincere. So the Ukrainian option for the A-10 appears out for now. But what if Congress decides to keep fighting the retirement? As some elected leaders watch the A-10 move to the boneyard, they might be wondering, what have we done? Resistance appears to be brewing again. The non-partisan Project on Government Oversight, POGO, which began its life as the Project on Military Procurement, monitors wasteful and unsafe activities from the US federal government. It even won the Society of Professional Journalists Sunshine Award in 2009 for its reporting on wasteful spending in the Air Force, so it has a lot of street cred in this area among members of Congress. In 2023, it raised a stink about the A-10. POGO's Dan Grazier released documents that reportedly proved the Air Force's lack of commitment to the Close Air Support mission in violation of long-standing executive agreements that says the Air Force will provide close air support for the Army. However, the documents on F-35 training that Glazer released showed no requirement for close air support training among the Lightning II's pilots. Pilots cannot just drop bombs from 25,000 feet or higher. Instead, they must fly close to the ground and effectively deliver their payloads. No such procedures existed in these documents, which dated from October 2022. Bit of a contradiction there, right? Because the Air Force has long sold the F-35 as the replacement for the A-10 in the close air support role. If so, there should be a close air support function in the training. Instead, the release seemed to echo then Air Force Chief of Staff Mark Welsh when he said in 2016 that the F-35 would not replace the A-10, despite claims that it would from as early as its initial contract award in 2001. Grazer's report reminded some policymakers of the bad old days when the Air Force rapidly lost the ability to provide close air support after World War II. This loss proved devastating in Korea. where only US Navy pilots performed the job adequately. The A-10 was supposed to prevent this from happening again. And there's more than training documents. Close air support personnel in the Air Force are dwindling in number. Grazier also got hold of comparison test data between the two planes. The tests occurred in 2018 and 19 as required by law, but the Air Force only reported the results in February 2022. The public report is still heavily redacted. Still, Pogo claimed that the tests were designed to make the F-35 look as good as possible, including by not having any ground troops present during them. Even without a level playing field, the result was that the F-35 did not perform as expected in the A-10's role. One interesting revelation suggested that the F-35's unprecedented ability to share data added to the tasks the pilots had to complete and therefore required more effort for pilots to coordinate with each other, reducing reaction time. Pogo concluded by warning lawmakers to not make decisions based on the talking points of Air Force leaders. Other A-10 veterans questioned the Air Force's logic about the current threat environment. One of the biggest challenges the United States would face in a war in the Indo-Pacific would be the destruction of air bases in Japan and the Philippines at the hands of Chinese missiles, which would make operations from the fighter jet fleet much more challenging. These veterans argue that the A-10's ability to perform its mission in less than ideal circumstances could be critical in a battle for Taiwan, where troops and ships in contact with the enemy would need air support. Since bases in southern Japan and the northern Philippines are close to Taiwan, the A-10 would not need to cross as much distance to get to the contested space. Even so, in 2024, these warnings and arguments appear to have waned on Capitol Hill, as Congress allowed more A-10 retirements. Still, it required the Air Force to reveal more about its plans for the retirement process and its overall impact on the US military. So, what do you think will happen next? Is the Air Force right about the A-10 being obsolete in today's threat environment, or is it necessary to maintain an adequate close air support function? Will we still see the A-10 in the skies in 2030? Don't forget to let us know in the comments, and also make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out why new US Manta Ray submarine terrifies China, or click this other video instead.